In this next session, we will be hearing from our speakers on the topic of circularity in Ukraine, where they will discuss both the pathways to progress, the gaps that exist, and the challenges faced to implement circularity principles here in Ukraine, and some of the strategic alliances which are being made between both Ukrainian and European and wider audiences. The session will be split into two groups. So we will first invite our speakers to come and give a presentation, and thereafterwards we will moderate a short Q&A session where we can explore some of the topics raised in more detail. So I will first invite our first speaker to the stage, which is Sofi Halat. Sofi, if you want to come join. So Sofi is an architect and project manager for Ukrainian-German initiative Hope Home, and Hope Home dedicate their promoting the use of eco-materials in Ukraine's reconstruction. They work at the intersection of architecture, education, and sustainability, and Sofi makes sure that she fosters cross-sectoral partnerships and develops learning programs that strengthen community recovery. So Sofi, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jamie. Let's start. So, yeah, I will switch to Ukrainian.
So, my topic is about low carbon emission, and my colleague will tell what we do with this, and I hope my colleagues will tell about it in more details. So what is Hope Home? So this is the German pilot project about ecological recovery in Ukraine. It's about interagency network which is engaged in recovery building materials, and it covers all sector of stable building. And one of our, and we are joking that our project is expanding without control, but we will take over it. So we have need in recultivating soils and reuse of building materials from concrete rubbles, and use of some products of clay, ceramic, and the wide usage of such products. So let's talk about the CO2 emissions. I divided into 4 sectors: regulations and certifications, education, financial limits, and interaction with communities. So as for regulation challenges, so we have a problem that a long-term process of recovery is quite long. It is underway. We know that there are speakers of this symposium are here. Who are they here? They hold, they attend meetings dedicated to the building regulations, and it takes a lot of time, and the steps are too small, and unfortunately there are a lot of initiatives that are limited and that cannot be developed to the limitation of buildings rules. As for, there are some producers who are engaged in ecologically friendly materials, and they are working with the certification of materials. And this is a big necessity for architects to work with them, especially when it comes to some projects like building a residential house. Another regulation challenge is a small life cycle of principles of materials and process. So we introduce some changes to the rules and regulations, but as for the intersectoral interaction, it is quite difficult. Ministries are not cooperating closely in terms of the recovery of Ukraine. So the complication of the bureaucracy, I think that everyone understands what it means. So as for any project, bureaucracy is is a challenge for any initiative. As for financial problems, high cost of stable materials, what it means? Materials the preliminary price for the materials are higher usually. And in many cases, it is impossible to use these materials for the communities with limited budgets. For example, we are working in the Mykolaiv community, in the Mykolaiv district, and this is one of the most suffered community during the occupation. And there is presence of the UN agencies, and they say, so we can't use your building materials because we can't just buy them. So, for example, we have a system eProzoro, but we can't use it because, for example, if we use some material and usual material, so tender will be given to the producers who will provide cheaper materials. So eco materials are not so developed, and eco materials are more expensive, and it's more difficult to find employees to work with these materials. So there is no possibility that this material will be used during the building, even if it's certified. So the lack of the financing and the human resources. So, so this is what the Jamie is asking about. What is the lack? So we need sustainable support. They are looking for funds. They're applying for grants, and it takes a lot of resources that could be used for researches or for the implementation of these building materials. The prioritization of cheaper but technologically better solutions. This is what I have already said. So as for the educational challenges, as you can see, there are a lot of them because we have divided them into 4 columns. So let's look through. So basic ecological knowledge. People do not understand this issue. Small portion of community understands how building materials influence on the health. So I am an architect. I have a big experience. So my house was hit, and I started to scan and screen my house without proper uniform, and I didn't understand how it would affect my health. So when we were working in the community, we have already mentioned asbestos a lot of times, and at one workshop, we see young people, 17-year-old people, and they told us how they use damaged asbestos for to build roads, and we asked them not to do it anymore because they do not understand how hazardous these materials may be. They do not perceive these materials as danger. We are working in the village, and they perceived it as a past. So that's when it comes with the awareness of the public and formulate their knowledge. So it is amazing that we are gathered together to talk about it, but we need to cover so many people. We need to dedicate so much time to make people aware, to explain to them how these materials affect their health. Professional training. I was trained in lab, and I can say that there are several approaches concerning the eco materials, timber, clay, and other eco materials that we can find in our community. Nobody knows nothing about it. I know that the Kharkiv School of Architecture has a little bit different situation, and I congratulate them with this. But I think that this is exception, but not a rule. And I have another question. Not any architects, but real professionals. They only those who are deeply interested in this topic, they find some knowledge. But I think that it must be present at schools, at the institutions, and other educational establishments. I think that we need to restore our knowledge regarding the eco materials. So I think that these materials have been used since antiquity. All these materials were used in the past, and in Ukraine, these materials were popular. Like for Khata Mazanka, for example, it must be cultivated as a social and cultural part of our life, and we need to treat environment and to teach people to treat environment as a modern aspect. So we see this tendency to build ecologically friendly building. We see that it becomes more prestigious right now. But when I work with the premium segment, they don't want to hear about it. Don't tell us about it because these materials are not so stable, and they want to use cement and other materials which are not so ecologically friendly, and it's very difficult to persuade them that these materials, eco materials, are better than modern ones. And this thing, so institutional educations and standardizations. So we need to create a basis for creating employees for the building sectors. So at the legislative level, we need to introduce examine this issue. So most people in this hall who were speakers or will be speakers, they would like to integrate Ukrainian practices in the building sectors and to exchange experience and to use the best practices. There are first steps, but I think that it might be at the international school level. For example, there are a lot of summer schools for Ukrainians where students can exchange their experience. But so we had a wonderful speaker from Switzerland. Their results of their research are quite significant, and we need to integrate their results in our recovery. So this is a more scientific approach. So work with the communities. I have a lot of things to tell because I worked with the community last year, and I have been working with them since last year. So is there anyone in the hall who worked closely with the communities? Oh, yes. And how is it easy to work with them? Normal? I was collecting feedbacks from people who introduce a lot of things in this life, building materials, technologies, and when you work with the community, you are facing new challenges, and worked with the community that was deoccupied. So mental barriers, this is very big issue. And we had a workshop last year, and I'm not depressed at all, but for 4 days of this workshop, I was almost depressed because I understand the mental health of these people after the occupation and their perception of new things. It's very difficult for them. So in any case, the perception of new technologies is not so easy. On the one side they like that somebody's come and do something for them, but on the other side, they don't trust and they resist, and it's not so easy to do good. They try to avoid our help. So right now, one issue of working with the communities, it's awareness of the representatives of the communities. So they do not inform, they didn't inform their inhabitants. They didn't tell about what was going on. They just asked the inhabitants for this workshop, but inhabitants didn't know why they came, what they would do, and that was a disaster. It was our first experience, and we understand that we should go to the inhabitants and to communicate with them directly, not with their representatives. So corruption risks. So when you say, I will finance the community, some initiatives aimed at this topic, and at first the response is wonderful, but then the representatives resist when they don't understand how they can work, how can they benefit from it. So corruption risks are quite high, and we can't avoid this topic. So lack of the trust to new technologies. So it comes to the educational system. So we need to ensure educational communication. This is like a piece of advice for those who will implement any project in the communities. Hope implementation. So here we would like to give you some showcases. In 2024,
we had an exhibition in the House of Architecture in Kyiv City on Maidan Nezalezhnosti. There were 4 workshops, and there was an exhibition of eco-materials, raw materials. There were 9 stands, do-it-yourself technology. What people can do manually by themselves, and participants try to do it. Photos from our workshops. So you can see clay, straw. December 2024, at the same exhibition, we signed the memorandum with Mykolaiv City Council. So it was the first workshop in Mykolaiv Oblast. It was complicated mentally when you don't understand what for you are doing. So you are communicating, but there is no feedback. It is cold, windy. It was a huge challenge for us. June 2025, it was our second workshop in this community. It was pretty easy. We engaged the village where there was unemployment. There was a sugar beetroot factory before, and it was destroyed during occupation. So people were unemployed. They were restoring their own houses with what they could. They used broken asbestos, and we understood that we wanted to support them, and so we engaged them on a paid basis. And in September 2025, it was a youth exchange. It is a United Nations initiative engaging young people of Ukraine. Due to lack of funding, budgeting cuts, we managed to work with wood, with hemp, with so you can see the photo of a wooden bench. Young people were working. They even were working with hemp plaster, mixing it themselves. And you can see our website. 1-2 questions, because we will have questions during the panel after presentations.
Thanks very much, Sophie. So we will have a larger Q&A session once all of the speakers have spoken, but maybe just very quickly to see if there were any quick questions or responses to some of the work that Sophie shared there. Once again, if the online audience have any questions, if you can please drop them into the chat, and we'll make sure that we try to pick up those as well. No questions for now, I think. Yeah, great presentation. Everyone followed. Thank you very much. So for our next speaker, we have Anna Marchenko. I don't know, Anna, if you are online, if you can hear us.
Yes, I can hear.
Hi there,
can you
Anna.
hear me?
We can hear you well in the room. Yes, thank you for joining us. I think the colleagues are just pulling up your presentation now. There you are, great. So Anna is joining us very gratefully, supporting at the last moment and trying to bring to us the story about the progress that's being made in Ukraine on the topic of the circular economy. Anna is an architect, a researcher, and an associate professor at the Alanus University for Arts and Social Sciences. She is also a project manager for the Mykolaiv Water Hub reconstruction project, which she will be sharing with us today. She also holds a position on the board of the Women in Architecture Ukraine, and we're very grateful to have her here today. So Anna, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie, for your kind introduction. So I will switch in Ukrainian.
I will tell today about search of circular solutions for the reconstruction of Mykolaiv Water Hub and the project we are implementing under DBU and GIZ support. I will start with localization of this project. It is Mykolaiv city. Explanation for our foreign guests. It is in the south of Ukraine between Odessa city and Kherson city, 65 kilometers from the sea. And Mykolaiv city faces numerous problems since the start of the war. A lot of problems with water. In the beginning of the war, water supply was destroyed, providing drinking water. And the city was without drinking water for several years. And also when the dam was destroyed in summer 2023, additional problems were created. There was a flood of the nearby regions. So first background and regional economy, because if we are talking with circular economy, it is crucial to understand general picture and economical situation. Mykolaiv region economy was dependent on water from Kakhovka. It was water for irrigation. It was a part of regional economy. Secondly, Mykolaiv is a port and shipbuilding city. When the ports were closed on the right side, it was very bad financially, economically, and demographically. People started to leave. And speaking globally and acting locally, I will tell you about our local project. It is in the historical center of Mykolaiv, blue color on the map, and orange is our piece of land. There is a building, maybe you know what it is, a traditional house in the south of Ukraine, one-story building. If I tell you the history of this building, this building was empty for many years and it was in a very bad state. The history starts 150 years ago. It was the first building constructed on the foundation on the clay solution from stone. And in the 90s, it was refurbished several times. Also, something inside was changed at that time. You can see the facade of this building. In the beginning, so cement plaster was added. So archaeologists, we were removing layer by layer, and we understood primary layers, secondary layers, what kind of materials might be saved. I will tell you about the process. It was not a traditional architectural process, architectural service. It was a multi-layer process. We started to make it participatory, engage community. users, future users of the water hub, and in parallel, we conducted 5 workshops, and we also researched. So there were 3 processes in parallel. Photos from our workshops, and I will tell you a little bit about the decisions we made together with users and community. You can see our piece of land. So the gray is the existing building, and also we decided to keep part of it. Some parts of the building were made in 90s. They were made of some debris. We didn't understand the mixtures that were used. Engineers said that we had to demolish it and leave only the historical building, the primary building. Here you can see the plan. And on the right side, we plan to build the so-called summer kitchen, which is traditional for Ukraine. Our grandmothers used to have some kitchen, which was used only in summer. And we will use it as a maker space. And as an example of this pavilion, we want to test some materials and constructions we will not be able to test at the primary building, at the main building. Here you can see the existing building. Orange color means the materials we have to remove. And this is our new project. We will also make a roof. But we don't want to throw materials away. We have analyzed the existing materials. There is some wood. Also the mixture of wood and clay, which is called dranka in Ukrainian. Some bricks. The roof is made of wood. We can still separate these materials and reuse them or recycle, apart from the roof, which is made of asbestos. You have heard a lot about it. Today, we have to remove it very carefully. So the walls from the stone will stay, but we don't load them with a new construction because engineers said that in this case we would close them with concrete and we want to use these walls for our new house and our new constructions. They are made from wood and we put them into the old base. And we will use reused metal. Today, I will also tell you about our research within this project. Before we decided on the materials, we researched what was available in the region. There were straw, sand, clay soil, and also sunflower plants. What is the most interesting is former Kakhovsk Kakhovka Dam. It turned out into a green forest. This piece of land was flooded in Soviet times, and after the destroyal of the dam, now we can see a lot of willow trees there. And there are also a lot of reed. Reed is very popular in these places. Two years passed after the Kakhovka catastrophe, and this forest is becoming more mature, becomes more diverse. And so we decided to take into account 4 main plants, reed and willow trees. We studied many options. I will not show you all the options. It's just an example. Here you can see the wall constructions, and below you can see the example of blocks where clay is mixed with reed, and then after that there is plaster.
As for new constructions, we took this system that is already has been using in Ukraine. It's a panel walls. So we use a different kind of thermal insulation for these walls. So we do it from recycled materials. So this is the general picture and very brief description of our project. But before go to the progress and gaps, I would like to make some conclusions. It's not just architectural project. We are trying to use biological materials, or ecological materials, or circular economy materials. We present this project as an attempt of searching new concepts of economy in this region. So these approaches that do not use wildly natural resources, because since the Soviet era, we didn't change a lot for old approaches, and it's time to rethink and to change some systems that would be more resilient, because in some crises, the existing systems are not resilient. So we need to use ecologically friendly materials for construction, and to use a system that would regenerate the ecosystems. So right now, I would like to move forward, and gaps and progress is topic of our discussion. And my colleague Sophia has already talked about things, but I would like to start with something good, with progress, because I can see some progress. When I was establishing my architectural study in 2017, and I tried to introduce these issues to the society, so I didn't see big interest for ecological and energy efficient issues from the customers and from my colleagues. People said, so when we would have this problem, when we would have such quality of life like in Europe, then we will handle it. But I was trying to push these issues, and I can see that for the last 10 years, this dialogue has been developing, and interest is growing, interest to this topic. And I can see that that a lot of projects dedicated to these issues are receiving support from Europe. And this is the progress that I can see, and I'm very happy with that. But of course, there are some gaps where we need to work more. And one of this so painful topic is Ukrainian rules. We have already mentioned it during today's discussion. There are a lot of constructions are not impossible to be used right now due to the firing standards. So when we analyzed German standards and compared them with the Ukrainian standards, so in Ukraine, when you build a wooden building, it's a 4-category fire, 4-category fire, and it is impossible to build a building. So this is the topic which is very important, and it's impossible to talk about green recovery without bearing this in mind. I see that finances are better right now, but it's not enough, because if we want to accelerate green recovery, we need to invest more. So there is the lack of time for reconstruction. We need to build right now, today. So if we want to use the circular economy, that requires researchers, finance, tests, certification, and it requires time. And as the lack of time and finances, quite often architects are not so brave to take such projects, and they to take projects which are not so ecologically. Sophia has already mentioned about it. So at the workshops, so the perception of the people for the ecologically friendly materials that it affects financing a lot. It is a kind of prejudice for ecologically friendly materials. They say, oh, well, if it is made of biological materials, it would not that would not be used for a long time. it's easy to damage, to destroy the house made of these materials. So we need to work on this. And of course, we need more political will for such projects in terms of adopting new legislation, in terms of rules for energy efficiency. Of course, we are on our pathway to the EU accession, but I would like to see political will of Ukrainian politicians to make this real, not just to join the European Union. So this is the end of my presentation. If I don't know if I have time to answer one or two questions. If not, so we will see each other at the panel discussion.
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Anna, for the presentation. That was, I think, round of applause. Thank you. I think we have some time to take one or two questions, maybe as an immediate response to the presentation, and then we will have a wider discussion later. I see Sophie, you're with the question already.
Yes, but I will probably ask Ukrainian, okay?
We know each other because we are working in the same region and we have already met. And I would like to ask Anna, why did you choose this building? How did you choose it? So we didn't have a big choice, just several variants of buildings. And this was a proposal from the city. And there are a lot of empty houses, and I call it problematic real estate property. And there is little that we can do with this building, because this building is situated closer to the neighboring houses. For example, if you would like to build something new, it is impossible because we need to move the foundation, and there would be no place for building something new. But we would like to reconstruct because it's ecologically friendly, and that's why we chose the building for reconstruction that we could do. There were no other good options. This building is a historical building, but it's not under protection. And other buildings were under protection. So these are criteria that we need to bear in mind. So these are logic criteria that help us select the building. Or they were building with very big surface, total surface, or there were other factors. Thank you very much. You have mentioned about building standards, and you said if there are no new standards, building standards, that it means that we can't build circular economy. So question, I understand that you are not an official, but I wonder, what is an ideal process for changing building standards? Who must participate in this process? Who must develop the standards, or we need just to make copy-paste model? So what is your opinion? Thank you very much. First of all, I'm not an expert. I'm not a legislative expert, but I will express my opinion. I believe that there must not be a copy-paste process. We need to take into account everything we had. Maybe we should compare it with the European standards, but it must be Ukrainian rules, Ukrainian standards. And I think that we should involve a lot of experts, not just in the building sectors, but from other sectors as well. Some people who are working at the plants, engineers, architects, builders, and some citizens. And in this case, that would be real democracy. Because if only experts take part in this process or a limited working group, that would not be a democratic process. I believe so. I think that we have a big example. It's a building code of Ukraine. Who knows what it is? I think that is ideal scheme. So there is a deputy of the parliament, Anna Bonder. She's an architect, and she's developing a city building code of Ukraine. They have been doing this for 2 years. They take recommendations from at all sessions, and we have records of these sessions on the YouTube. They discuss it. They take into account, or they don't take into account the remarks, and it's in fact it's a democratic process. And I think that the building institutions have been adapting to the situation. Of course, there is a political issue. There is one challenge I didn't mention in the presentation, but there is a big problem because big players come into the market and they want to build quick and to make money and leave at the building site, and it's not a good thing. And our chief from the German side, we are trying to resist building concrete mafia here in Ukraine. Yes, unfortunately, we see it, and we as society need to support each other and to stand firm for our values that we want.
Thank you very much, Anna. Sorry for switching back to English. And thank you, Sophie, and colleagues in the room for the questions. I'm sure we've got much more discussion and debate to come. But I'd like to now introduce the next speaker in our session, who is Scott Brookes. Scott, I'm not sure if you are online or if you hear us well.
Yeah, hello. Hi, Jamie. Can you hear me clearly?
Scott. Yeah, we hear you in the room. Thank you. Thanks for joining us.
Excellent.
No problem at all. Briefly introduce you to the room, Scott, and then I'll hand over the floor to you to share your presentation. So Scott joins us now from the UK. He is a structural engineer and a humanitarian practitioner whose work bridges both sustainable building design, cultural conservation, and the circular economy. Prior to his current role at Elliott Wood, Scott led Ramble UK's international development team, where he supported the delivery of emergency relief with Shelter Box. He's co-designed health and educational buildings with Article 25 in Nepal and Rwanda. And most recently, he's been working on post-conflict building damage assessment training, including in Ukraine with Radar. More recently, Scott has also co-authored the Institute of Structural Engineers Circular Economy and Reuse Guide, and he currently serves as a chair of architecture in Development's Global Challenging Accelerator Board. So Scott will be talking to us about some of the progress and some of the discussions happening in the UK, and I hand the floor to you now, Scott. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. I just want to make sure I'm sharing the correct screen, okay? Is that showing okay?
Yeah, we see your presentation now. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, it's an absolute privilege to speak, and my apologies, I can't be with you in person. My thoughts are with Ukraine at this time. This war is the most destructive conflict on European soil since World War II. And when I've been reflecting on it from the UK, the pressing question that keeps coming back, taking a top-down view, is how we rebuild at scale without repeating the mistakes of that time. Now that can feel like a question for the history books, or it could feel very irrelevant, but there's a very famous quote, which is that those who ignore history are doomed to repeat it. So I think looking very closely at what was done well and what were considered mistakes is a worthwhile exercise. So if we go back, around 1945, Britain faced a crisis. Whole areas of the city was razed to the ground. Questions of what to put back, how to house its people, how to drive its economy. There were significant global shortages of materials and labor, and an enormous pressure to build quickly. And this all sounds incredibly familiar, actually, doesn't it? And many other nations in Europe rebuilt in a very like-for-like way. They created a facsimile of what was there before. And so the buildings were deconstructed if they were partially damaged and reconstructed in much the same way, to the same style, as if it never happened. But the UK is an interesting case study, actually, because it innovated with the latest materials and theories of design that were being experimented with at the time. So that was long-span reinforced concrete structures, precast systems, prefabricated houses, housing estates with a commitment to 20th century social thinking. And this willingness to break new ground and to innovate attracted a large number of kind of leading architects and engineers around from the continent. And this post-war mindset, which is a deep trust in innovation to solve this paradox of speed and repeatability, I've been reflecting back on the success of it, and there's kind of two lessons, I suppose. One, that these emergency decisions, that are the decisions that are made under this pressure cooker of political discourse, they have long tails that tend to go on and on. So it's almost once the construction itself is embedded in the culture of the country, it can mean risk and opportunity for generations to come because of the lifespan of buildings. And the second thing that is to beware the allure or attraction of novelty and oversimplification of what are very complex post-war problems to be addressed. I think at the time, records suggest they were seen as quite a binary speed versus quality issue. But hidden within that, and the sort of beneath the surface of that, was issues of equity and equitability, biodiversity, safety, longevity, and that's where at the time it was considered secondary, or possibly not even considered at all. And so we move on now 50 years, and because of the scale of that rebuild after the war, because of the scale of the destruction, it's a legacy that today's sustainability practitioners and building designers, we're still unpicking it. We have, structures that leak heat, that decay early, that are difficult to adapt, not well suited to adaptation, because they were built with innovation in mind, to a very specific use case. And I suppose this is the situation we might find ourselves in 50 years' time, if the reconstruction isn't dealt with top down in the right way. And if the UK, even the buildings that predate the war, they're some of the oldest and coldest houses in Europe. So everything that we do in sustainability has to start with removing asbestos, with tackling condensation, with upgrading of insulation. So we can't deal with the problems of tomorrow before we've dealt with the problems of yesterday. And so these are the embedded issues that you can blindly walk into if you're not thinking about society as a whole. So as we chase net zero ourselves, how can we deal with these pre-existing issues, but also make them future fit? How can we make sure we don't pass them on to our children, these issues? And so it's kind of why in the UK, along with appreciation of embodied carbon impacts, which is growing day by day. The emphasis has been on shifted from new build and operational carbon and operational energy to refurbishment and retrofit, which is to say, how do we better use what we have? How do we ensure that this next great reimagining, this next great phase of rebuilding, which has been driven by retrofit and performance and the climate crisis, is done with that full understanding and foresight. And I'm just showing you this Overton window because if there is a lesson from mid-century Europe and the UK, it's build it once and build it well. But what does well mean? How do we define well? And I've seen that word used many times in literature around Ukraine. Who decides that specification? Who are we building it well for? Can we do it without policy? You know, if policy isn't coming, can we do it without it? And it's never been as much complexity as now into what a good building looks like. Never been as much opinion as to what good looks like. And to a degree, this is a political issue or a decision made by the collective, by the public. And so this Overton window is relevant because if you're not familiar with it, it's classified as the range of subjects and arguments that are considered politically acceptable at the time. It's also known as the window of discourse, so what people are willing to talk about or not willing to talk about. And it frames a lot of the conversations I have around sustainability, to be honest. And it is true, absolutely true, that without the right policy, and I know a lot of the conversation at this conference in the past has been around policy. It's true that policy is essential to make sense of the complexity and variety of situations and to meet net zero at a national scale. But you can't take something that is unthinkable, that is on the outside of this scale that I'm showing you here, or something that's radical and put it into policy. It won't stick, even if politicians advocate for it, even if there's a very progressive government that sees the risk that we might be going into. It won't stick. You've only got to look at the recent rollbacks of sustainability initiatives and policies across Europe to see what happens when the political discourse changes. You know, they don't stick. Even if it's seen as economically or politically sensible. So to get from what is from radical to what is acceptable or even popular, if we're lucky, it takes a journey of what I'm calling normalization. So, you know, large groups of people typically have a natural resistance to change. They call it sort of antibodies, if you like our human body's immune system. And so how do we move the needle of social discourse or social conversation? And this is where grassroots organizations come in. And this is where I'm going to talk to you about what we've been doing in the UK. It's kind of through technical empowerment, through our technical understanding. In this context I've described, where we've got increasingly difficult constraints, they take these radical ideas and through lobbying, through a reframing, through education, through demonstrator projects, which I'll show you shortly, they de-risk these ideas. They make them normal to people. And these groups act outside of market forces, and they're driven by individual ethics. They're driven by a vision for the future that is quite different from the current track. And I've shown a few standout organizations here in the UK that are increasingly well known. Architects Declare, there on the bottom right, have been looking at socio-cultural barriers predominantly, and they're about reframing sustainability as this sort of ethical baseline expectation. It's not an option. It's not a design option. It should be normal. The Architects Climate Action Network, ACAN, there, top right, they look more at framework and understanding barriers. So people misunderstanding what sustainability is about. And they use campaigns, they use educational reform and community-led knowledge to address that. The LETI, the London Energy Transformation Initiative, they focus on technological barriers, I would say, and they produce open access carbon targets, design guides, and they align data and language across different disciplines of the built environment. Engineers Reuse Collective is looking at framework barriers, and they're interesting because they they basically challenge the status quo of companies needing to be always in competition with each other, and open the door for donor and recipient buildings in a circular economy to share materials, even if the consultant teams and the design teams are different organizations. And finally, Don't Waste Buildings confronts, you can tell by the title of the organization maybe, but they confront the sociocultural and political barriers by challenging the assumption that the demolition is inevitable. So they cover a huge range of different barrier types, and as I said, do the hard work of moving from the unthinkable to at least the sensible. Then once it becomes sensible and popular, what we see is some early clients start picking up interest in these initiatives. There are lots and lots of projects that I could probably have shown you here, and apologies, I've actually chosen 2 steelwork ones that my firm has been involved in. 2 steelwork ones that are from the sphere of circularity. On the left-hand side, 20 Giltspur Street. I should say these are both in central London, so it's a good point of comparison. But 20 Giltspur Street on the left-hand side was an attempt to keep as much material in situ or in place, and that was by jacking the floors. For the first and second floors were jacked up vertically by 1.5 meters, and they basically retained upwards of 80% of the original steelwork, which otherwise would have been lost, which obviously has significant embodied carbon benefits, and replaced otherwise a pretty typical steel and timber hybrid approach, which is very normal for UK construction. And at 180 Piccadilly on the right-hand side there, 74% of its frame was from another building that was deconstructed nearby. So that's around 1,500 tons of steel from the 1990s were salvaged from another building that was owned by the same developer to put into this building. And this type of matchmaking across both developer portfolios, but also kind of large, owner operators, is becoming increasingly de-risked in the eyes of these building owners, and we're seeing it becoming ever increasingly popular. And as we move further over the Overton window, we're moving into now coming from popular into policy. And so finally, we're in the sort of early days of policy making off the back of that grassroots movement. And Part Z on the left-hand side, it emerged in 2021 from frustration within the design and engineering community about that lack of regulation that I was telling you about. And it was a small volunteer group only that drafted this regulation. So it wasn't a guidance note. It spoke exactly to what politicians wanted to see and wanted the format they wanted to see it in, so that it could be dropped straight into our building regulations as it currently stood. And it borrowed from the Netherlands that already had embodied carbon caps in from 2018, but also other guidance in Denmark, Sweden, and France. And it's also now referenced in planning policy in different areas of the country. So that's a real success story of what this grassroots movement has been able to do. Similarly, the net zero carbon building standards was launched in 2022 with this trying to address this issue that I'm sure you all experience on your day-to-day lives, which is everyone says net zero carbon. No one knows what it means, and there's no consistency as to what it means. And so the writers of it pooled lots of data, and they produced a very science-based benchmark for what it means. So we're all speaking the same language. And now these metrics are kind of typical requirements in briefs, in design competitions, and in green finance criteria as well. But that's, that all sounds very, very positive. It sounds like we're, basically become a fully circular economy, and I don't think that's true at all. There are still huge areas that need to be tackled for it to scale, and these areas are directly applicable to Ukraine as well. Market forces. I've chosen the top 3, I would say. Market forces. This speaks to this competition between the price and supply of secondary materials versus primary. Obviously, a huge difference in scale and a huge difference in maturity of the marketplace. I anticipate that during the rebuild, rebuild, we will see, during Ukraine's rebuild, I would expect to see this dynamic between the primary and secondary materials to shift significantly. We're going to see deep material scarcity because of the speed of construction, and obviously a difficulty in waste disposal as well, which will prioritize circularity. So we might see a complete shift in that market dynamic. The middle one there is recertification, which is spoken about at a lot of these conferences, and it's often seen as the #1 barrier. Once material is moved from its original position, it's no longer being certified as part of the building. It has to be certified in its own right. And obviously, we have made a lot of progress with regards to insurers. There've been a lot of inquiries to insurers, and I feel like they've softened and become more keen on the idea. There is still a big question mark over whether reclamation merchants take on the certification themselves to sell the members kind of ready to build, but I don't think they necessarily are keen on doing that because they don't want to own the risk, despite the fact that they're doing the processing, or whether that risk is held by the contractor or whether they certify once it's back in the new building. And finally, building trust. And I think some of the other speakers that I've just heard speaking are talking about this. This means that trusting that it's not going to cause you a headache, down the line. Questions like, it looks very different. Will this perform as a new element? We know that 70% of buildings in Ukraine are estimated to contain asbestos. So, it would be fair to question, has that been fully removed? Has the contamination from rocket fuel, which is obviously a sad truth of the war, also been addressed? Do we know where the material originated from? Is it clear who owned it before it was processed? Ownership rights are also a big part of building trust in circularity being a big part of the future of Ukraine. So how do you sow the seeds of this grassroots movement? Is it something that can be, just moved across, for Ukraine? And I've broken it down into 3 areas. So it's relationships, which create coalitions of like-minded, but actually more importantly, non-like-minded people, different thinkers and different actors. Agency, so practitioners control a lot of levers, but not all of them. They have access to a lot of change, but not all of it, and we need to partner. We need to be willing to partner. And communication is the choice of how we want to communicate the message. We don't, the temptation is to talk from architects to architects, or from within design teams. This isn't necessarily a design problem to be solved, or it isn't only a design problem to be solved. So firstly, the relationships is the law of the few, which you might be familiar with, which is that there are only a handful of people in every group that will go beyond and be responsible for great and rapid social change. So with that in mind, we need to increase the size of our social circle. We need to become connectors in order to increase the likelihood that we're going to have those people who are going to create rapid social change, and we're going to see the grassroots movements of similar to what we've seen in the UK in other countries. And there's obviously these 3 types of people, and I think a lot of us would consider us to have deep knowledge in the field, or have this maven role. It's a weird word, but less of us probably see ourselves as salespeople, and maybe that's kind of one of the biggest barriers that we've got to overcome. Secondly is communication, and this is about telling the story with the target audience in mind, and tailoring it to that audience very almost at the exclusion of all other. We need to spark an emotional response, but we also need to speak to the language of the market. If we look at this graph, I really love this graph. The height of this hump is the frictions and barriers that we're feeling in the moment. And we share the stories and experience of doing things differently, and the success stories of doing it differently, to flatten that hump out, or you look some of those dotted lines, because people will push back. To be constructively disruptive, which is a phrase I use a lot, you need to expect disruption, and you need to that can be a positive sign sometimes. And as I said, you need to speak to the language of the market. You need to convert the technical to get developers, to get contractors and policymakers to actually remember, to get the message to be sticky and to stick in their heads. And what we're expecting is a huge influx of European companies into Ukraine. when the rebuild starts. And these companies are used to speaking in terms of EU sustainability policy. Ukraine must prepare for this form of communication, communicating in line with the terminology used by these regulations, but also by selling the co-benefits internally inside the country to policymakers, which is, for circularity at least, health outcomes, decreased program times of delivery, less exposure to material scarcity, which I talked to you about before, and volatile supply chains. And lastly is agency. Agency is, put more simply, what can I actually influence? What's realistic for me to influence? And it's about knowing the boundaries of your influence and what actually sits beyond your reach. Not to limit yourself, but to speak to others and to, as I said before, collect in groups. That means you can touch on all of these different barriers to circular economy implementation. And I use this chart a lot, and I apologize for it being very wordy. But it's great at breaking down not only the different groupings of barriers, but the actors on the left-hand side within the construction industry that feel that they have the ability to actually change them. And when I talked to you about those grassroots movements in the UK, I mean, I did mention specifically that each of them addressed a different barrier to circularity, be it cultural, technical, financial, or legislative. And you can't expect any one group to fix them all. And sometimes that agency means your collective. If you have a grassroots collective, it needs to stay intentionally independent, and that's free from the institutions that weigh it down as well. And we do find that financial and economic barriers, and I'm sure this comes up a lot in this conference, financial and economic barriers are the hardest to move and arguably the most important too, and probably why we end up talking about policy, because we see that as probably the next most important, but possibly easier to fix than the financial issue. But there are ways around it. So public-private partnerships, helping developers look at procurement routes that are different to now, and also creating circular service lines that are able to be bought and to be sold with great clarity and great comfort from the industry. And so just reflecting, if there's one lesson from the UK that I hope is transferable to the Ukrainian context, it's that rebuilding better and rebuilding faster aren't necessarily going hand in hand. They don't necessarily have to be mutually exclusive. But from an international perspective, I would say that the circular economy opportunity that it seems to me within Ukraine are really clear and very compelling. And the idea of framing the rubble clearance work as part of an ongoing process of urban mining being a very common buzz phrase within circular economy, using vernacular and bio-based materials. I hear some of my colleagues on this in this group presenting around bio-based materials is very important to the circular outcomes. But seeing that as part of community engagement rather than just another type of design material. And keeping partly damaged buildings due to their social and cultural importance, and possibly understanding the difference between social and cultural importance. And with new circular innovations entering the market all the time, it's obviously clear we need pilot projects. And everything that I'm hearing from others is exactly what we need to test bed these innovations against different use cases in different geographies for different clients and at different scales. And as I showed you what happened in London, there is an argument that the rush to London and the UK, I should say, that the rush post-war to create new buildings meant that they fell into a trap of making overly simplistic assumptions about what the problem was to solve. And I think by test bedding what you're doing here, it's exactly what's needed. And I'm showing this photo here to close because despite the clear devastation of war being shown, I also see from a circular economy perspective a great deal of hope in the building in the background, obviously ready and able to be repaired and upgraded. in this rubble in the foreground, where there are clearly elements that can be reused and not downcycled, but reused as structure. And I also see obviously evidence of community, which I'm sure is eager to return home. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Scott. And great to see already some of the interconnectedness between the presentations we've had here this morning, or this afternoon rather. I know, Sophie, you mentioned regulatory constraints and technical constraints and community constraints. And Scott, your introduction of the various grassroots groups in the UK who are addressing those in turn. Also then Anna and her reference to challenges with the communication of projects and the communication of bringing the community along on that journey of circular economy and of moving to sustainable practices. And I know, Scott, here you've been speaking again about that communication and the role that that plays. So yeah, thank you for bringing up these topics as well. If there are any questions from the room, we can take a couple now, and then shortly afterwards, maybe we can have a wider discussion format. I'm keen to return to that discussion, Scott, about the Overton window and this progression from radical to popular to policy. It feels like that's very pertinent to many of the conversations we've been having here around pilot projects and around the hope to move that window. So I'm sure we can return to that in the longer format. Were there any questions in the room before we do so? Maybe one just from me, Scott. You mentioned that there are mistakes that have been made in the UK's post-war reconstruction, and maybe some of the tensions between building back quickly and building back properly, and the kind of issues in here about heritage and listing as well. Are there any kind of highlights or any immediate responses or things that Ukraine could be learning from some of the pitfalls that the UK fell into in its own post-war reconstruction?
Yeah, I mean, I often use the analogy of the cart horse and the racehorse when it comes to talking about the type of heritage and the legacy that we're dealing with retrofitting our existing building stock for the future. The cart horse is the building that is probably, you would say, pre-war, that was built out of, brickwork, or it might be a warehouse, or it might be, a house, as I said, constructed from brickwork or masonry. I mentioned the push to innovation and the test bedding and trialing of new technologies after the war, and what this meant. Yes, it had fantastic social benefit in terms of increasing internal floor areas with very long slab spans and very few columns, and we were able to build longer and higher than we ever were before. And without, countries like the UK, I suppose, test bedding these technologies, we wouldn't be where we are now. However, when we are now coming back to these buildings, those racehorse buildings, those buildings that have been optimized and refined for a very specific use case, are the absolute hardest to turn into something new without deconstructing them. And in every case, we're looking for solutions that don't involve deconstruction. So I think that's one of the biggest negative legacies that comes from innovation, which is where we move too fast with the promise of something so good. And maybe you say it's very difficult for us to anticipate what is going to be the asbestos of 50 years in 50 years time, and what's going to be, one of the other innovations that were miracles and were very positive. But I think we need to try to see which have false promise and which will actually be beneficial.
Great, thank you very much. And thanks again for the presentation. I think if I can ask the colleagues if they can bring up Andrii Stendera's presentation. So unfortunately, Andrii, through personal circumstances, was unable to join us in person here today. His presentation was going to speak about the progress and some of the development which is being made in collaboration between Ukrainian and European architects, and kind of be the last step in this presentation that we have here. I definitely don't want to speak in detail or on behalf of Andrii and his project and his work, but I think it would be right just to show a couple of ideas that Andrii is working on, and some of the approaches of his practice, and some of the opportunities that they're starting to look at here in Ukraine. So Andrii is working with Duplantier Architects. They are a French architectural company working out of Paris, but they have been working now in Ukraine for a number of years with Andrii heading their Ukrainian office. And he is working on projects across Ukraine, from schools, from hospitals to cultural centers. He's working on topics of reuse. He's working on topics of reconstruction. So many of the themes that we're looking at here today. As I say, I definitely don't want to speak about any of his architecture, as not to do it a disservice. So I would invite the guests here, if they do have interest, to have a look at the website there, martinduplantier.com. They've also been a great support to some of the development in Ukraine in terms of the academia, and Andrii and Martin both taught with the Kharkiv School of Architecture this year, and they were able to actually realize that the project and the work that the students produced during this workshop were seen in Venice at the Biennale this year. So they're taking the conversation in Ukraine and making sure that this voice and this discussion is heard beyond as well, and bringing ever more expertise and important focus to the particulars of the topics and the problems that we need to address, and the challenges. And the last thing I wanted to share here that Andrii has been working on with his colleagues is an encyclopedia called rebuildgreenua.com. And the encyclopedia is currently collecting both materials, and I haven't helped myself by putting the Ukrainian version on the screen as opposed to the English version, but hopefully my Ukrainian colleagues can read that there are both material suppliers and different forms of material which are being recorded. And this is open source, so it's free for everyone to access. And I know that the work that Andrii and Martin are doing in Ukraine is taking this as a starting point. It's looking to use local materials within the projects that they work on, both in terms of debris and material which is being reused, but also using locally sourced materials where possible. So I would definitely encourage those in the room and those online, if you have some time, to also check out the work that they're doing here on rebuildgreenua.com. So I think now we will turn to more of a panel discussion and invite our speakers back. So if I could invite Sophie, and if I can ask the colleagues to bring back our speakers who are online. And very kindly, given Andrii was unable to join us, Lidiia, Shimon, who is speaking in our final panel today from the Ecoaction, has very kindly agreed to join us at the last moment here. Lidiia, as you will see from her presentation following, has a wealth of experience and expertise from her work with Ecoaction. I'm mindful not to give you too much of an introduction, because I know that you will be speaking about some of the work that you're looking at afterwards, but maybe if I give you the floor, you can just briefly introduce yourself and your work, and then as a couple of questions from me as a starter, and then yeah, if there are questions from the room. And again, just reiterating, if we have participants joining online who want to ask questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll try to get through to them. So Lidiia, firstly, over to you. Thank you.
My name is Lidiia Shimon. I'm a representative of the French company Mykolaiv. Our company has 17 years experience of circular economy, not just in France, but worldwide. Mykolaiv took part in such popular projects like the reconstruction of Beirut seaport, the underground station in Paris, the Olympic Games. It was very popular project. Well, it's not the last project, but it's one of the projects where we were engaged for several years. Earthquake in Turkey, and I will go into details later. And as for Ukraine, we have been working here since 2022, since the deoccupation of the Kiev region. So I'm very glad to meet you, and later I will tell you more about it. Thank you.
Thanks, Lidiia, and hopefully everyone can recognize that Lidia's contribution is as valuable in this panel and in the next panel, and I think that speaks to the interconnectedness and the overlaps between all of our subjects here today. We can't take one of these topics in isolation. They inherently inform one another and have overlap. So very happy to have you here on the panel as well. Thank you. So one of the first questions I wanted to ask is, we have seen from all of the speakers that there are numerable challenges to implementing circular economy principles here in Ukraine, but also both in the UK, as Scott mentioned. Yet, despite that, all of you have demonstrated projects and approaches and practices which have allowed you to address those challenges and start to make some progress in those areas. So my question is, could you reflect on a couple of the conditions maybe that have allowed you to make that progress already? And how do we go about amplifying those opportunities, and how do we find more of them? How do we expand on them as we continue to progress in the circular economy here in Ukraine and elsewhere? So maybe Sophie, over to you first, and then to colleagues on them.
Does it work? Yes, it works. Should I answer English or Ukrainian? Probably Ukrainian would be better.
So Jamie asked, despite all the difficulties we have been discussing, what helped us cope with this job. And I would like to say that partnerships that helped us. In our situation, without Germany, decided to launch the initiatives and to present the initiatives where they are needed mostly, and then they created the whole network of acquaintances. So we are the unique team, Ukrainian German projects. So our project was financed by Europe, by foreign investments, foreign funds, not Ukrainian. Absolutely different challenges we had, absolutely different methods we used. Some micro grants, support from the Ministry of Ecology from Germany. They supported a part of our program. Support of our test lab, and so we received funds, first funds from the people from Germany, and then Ukrainian people helped us as well. Yes, partnerships, different sources of finance, and we compare us with the different, and everything is interconnected. And the way we are communicated right now, we see that it is a real community, that you find each other for implementing common projects, and it help each other. I would like to say that we have discussed a lot of things, but we didn't mention the main thing. That the exchange of European experience is very important, but which country has been facing the war like this for the last 70 years? It's a rhetorical question because such devastation and grief that we are facing is a big challenge for us, but a difficult time give birth to strong people, and this is the most important. Maybe it's very terrible, but war helps us rethink everything we had. And first of all, I would like to emphasize, and I do it at any exposition, that Ukraine has a great human potential, human resources. This is the first that help us to restore, to recover, because the level of professionalism of our architects, engineers, ecologists is fantastic level. Our people can do everything. Of course, we should align with the European standards and we should implement the standards in Ukraine. But at the same time, we need to remember that we have all possibilities for growth, and we don't have to forget that we need to look at the foreign experience, but we need to remember about our own potential and our own possibilities, because we have post-Soviet influence, but the ability to assess our resources in right way is crucial. So we have talked about the understanding with the community, but we need to understand the essence of any problem to explain it to others. If I don't understand, I can't explain it to anyone. If I doubt, nobody will listen to me. And when people come to you and they come back to you and they say, we are ready to work, it encourages us to work. And I would like to emphasize that if message is correct, so this is the biggest motivation for our people. Of course, we have some narrow areas, some problematic spaces, but indeed we have a great potential. So I would like to ask, I know that you are working in the community where we had problems. So there is a plant for processing of rubbish. I would like to take your time because it is mentioned in our speech.
I asked, we basically work at the same community. And I asked, did they had problems there? And so she said that she will talk about it on presentation.
In the next presentation, yeah. I wonder whether we could just quickly jump back to the first question, and Anna, Scott, if you're still online and joining us, whether you could reflect on some of the conditions that have allowed you to successfully embed circularity principles in your projects and in your work, in spite of the current challenges and the current obstacles that we face.
Appreciating, the projects I mentioned are out of context. They're not speaking to specifically and directly to the challenges of Ukraine in this moment. I think the point made just then about manpower and about the potential for Ukraine to drive forward a circularity movement, I couldn't agree more, and I think that's absolutely right. I think what is able to be drawn from European partners is effectively the maybe a roadmap for policy and practice, rather than a specific and single route to it. The other thing I'd say is that we all need to get beyond pilot projects quickly, and I think, as I said in my talk, I think we think that policy is the route to that, but equally we need tools and data to verify that reused materials and structures are safe and people are happy to use them. This comes back to what I mentioned about public trust and the narrative around circular economy and reused materials. And we also need the market and the procurement signals to favor retained structure and reused materials. Because if we, like I said in my talk, if we focus on speed alone, and I know that speed's very important because, you know, because of the extent of damage, but if we focus on it alone, new build will win out every single time. So I think, yeah, those would be my reflections.
Great, thank you. And Anna, if you're still with us. Sorry, we can't see on the screen. Earlier.
I would like to add to my colleagues. I agree with all of them. Partnership was crucial for our project too, and human factor. I can only add that if you want to change, this is also very important. If you want to rebuild better, to make it better than before, to change something for good, it is a robust driving force. We can't underestimate it. For our project, we had some partnerships in Ukraine and also in Germany. It was crucial for funding, for networking, also partnership with Mykolaiv city. I am out of Dnipro. I am from Dnipro, but I see that Mykolaiv wants to develop and wants to enable such projects. Political will is also important.
Great, thank you. Apologies for the backwards and forwards between English and Ukrainian, and thank you for your patience with my lack of Ukrainian. Maybe I can turn to the room or online if there were any questions. Otherwise, we can proceed with some more. I don't have a laptop in front of me. Is there anyone online? Okay. Maybe we've spoken about many of the challenges, as I mentioned, whether it be regulatory or material or technical or community constraints. I wonder if in some of the projects you can work on, whether you could speak to what's the main barrier been and how have you overcome that barrier in order to get your projects delivered. And Scott, I know that you're joining us maybe with some of those challenges and some of those positions already haven't been challenged or tackled by groups that you mentioned, but I wonder if you can speak about how those groups assembled and how they sought to tackle some of the challenges there, whether it's Letty or if it's Architects Declare. Maybe there's one or two that you could focus on. So Sophie, maybe over to you first.
So the question was about the most important challenge. We can overcome all of them. The issue is how to stay motivated. Our challenge is when the project started to grow and we have to scale it up considerably at national level, and we don't have such capacity. So existential question arises whether we do develop, what should we do?
Thank you. Lidiia, did you want to answer this?
Something?
Yeah.
Honestly, there is a lot of barrier for Ukrainians, and we are going through very difficult periods, and there is a lot of difficulties in Ukrainian debians and legislation, but the worst is to work with the mentality, because we still have this problem that to buy something is every time cheaper than to reuse, recycle, and to make from the debris new materials. But yeah, this is the main barrier for the producers, for the armadas, for the government. But we should understood that we will not be able to put in the landfill all debris, because it's right now too much debris, and we have only one way: circular economy will save everything that we actually have, and the building sector is super important to cross the barrier and to work with our mentality.
Of course, thank you. I think it's been a recurring theme and topic we've discussed here already, the issue of debris and rubble and reuse. And I think, Scott, you touched on this by saying we can't deal with the problems of tomorrow before we address the challenges of yesterday, which I think speaks a lot to some of that that concern here in Ukraine about debris management and reuse. Maybe Scott or Anna, did you have any reflections on how you've overcome some of those challenges in your projects?
I think you asked me how some of the groups have sought to, or the creation of some of the groups that I mentioned have sought to overcome those barriers. The ones that come to mind, front of mind, because I've dealt with them very recently, the Engineers Reuse Collective, I think I alluded to, that they create a network between competing professionals to, outside of the competitive space. And I think this is very important in sustainability, to be able to sidestep free market competition, to be able to collaborate, but do so outside of business as usual. But it allows engineers to come together as a collective and marry up donor buildings with recipient buildings across a very large area geographically, but also across different scales of projects. We haven't yet got to the point of digitization or quality or volume of data to understand when donor projects are coming. So when the steelwork will become available, or when the concrete will become available, to marry that up with recipients in advance. So it requires very close coordination in the present and day to day, to make sure that those materials are married up across projects. The other one I was going to mention was Don't Waste Buildings, which is very much charged towards at the political barriers, perception barriers, but also planning. I think planning and political barriers are kind of so stitched together that it's sometimes hard to talk about one, not the other. But they're doing, I mean, I mentioned the Overton window, and I don't want to talk about that too much, but Don't Waste Buildings are doing amazing work, even in that reframing, but also in celebrating and amplifying, what is possible. And I mean, the architects declare a climate emergency as part of a group of practitioners. There's also a structural engineers declare a climate emergency, and there's ones for different discipline groups, professional discipline groups. But that was I feel like those were created at a different moment in time, where there was kind of quite a lot of inaction and very slow movement, and now they've morphed into kind of a more of a catch-all forum for lots of different professionals to meet and discuss the latest developments.
Great, thank you. And Anna, lastly, if you're there.
I want to add that we had numerous challenges and different levels, starting from conducting workshops when there are announcements about mining of the location, and we have to move to another location, and ending with engineering problems when you understand that you have planned something and it is impossible to implement that. For example, we had a lot of discussions about foundation, how to reinforce it, also some fire safety standards to follow, because the neighboring building is very close. There are enough challenges, huge and small, and there are different approaches how to handle them. We were trying to focus at the solutions. If you see, you should be open for other solutions, test them, try other solutions, and to think about the solution, not the problem. If we are talking about engagement, sometimes there was no consistency in participation. Sometimes people were interested, they came to the first workshop and they didn't come to the third workshop. So sometimes people who came to the fourth workshop, they didn't come to the first workshop. And it is normal. It is our life. Even later, this challenge was transformed into something positive because we tested the solutions from the first workshop with new people who came. So the list is long. How we handle them, I can talk a lot, but the most important is not to lose your motivation. If you know what for you are doing, you will overcome your challenges.
Great, thank you very much. Just check again if there were any questions from the room. Yeah.
How do you think, what is the best solution, how to change the attitude of our society, the mentality, if we are talking about participatory process? From my experience, the best solution is to demonstrate that our new materials are reliable, beautiful, and to demonstrate it to them. But if we are talking about participatory process, they should participate from the very beginning. How can we motivate them? Full question. How it is happening on practice? I have 3 different projects. one was with kids, the second one was with veterans, the third one is with IDPs. If you work with children, you always communicate with their parents. Why are you taking our children? If we explain children from the beginning, for example, how to recycle, not throw away, you can reuse it, and they absorb this knowledge very quickly. Veterans, this is very complicated. It is hard to work with them. They were traumatized. It is very difficult to engage them into circular projects, but we managed to do it in Mykolaiv, and veterans were involved in Pervomaisk, in Myrne. We explained to them that they are doing that for themselves, for their houses. They understood that they are needed. They are doing that for their community. It is very important. Social engagement and doing something manually is much more important for them than just blah, 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 or just talking. If you show them in practice, it is much easier. And so we managed to take debris after attacks at certain schools. IDPs, can we explain them what circular economy is? They have lost houses, they have lost their normal job. But I conducted training for them, and they said, wow, maybe it is a startup and we will be able to receive a grant from international community. So in the beginning, you should show them you will receive this, you will receive that, because if you start with environment, they don't care. You should first understand how to motivate them, how to make them interested. It is not easy.
Were quite difficult. We just came, say hello, and came out, because we say we can't work with you. We will work with you when you will be more conscious. If you want nothing, nothing will come. And those communities who were more initiative, they had one donor project, another project. Right now they have the school reconstructed, they have waste sorted. So those who want more get more. Thank you very much for your question. Well, it was very interesting for me to listen to you. I totally agree that it's necessary to train people started from the school. I'm working with the organization Ukraine Without Rubbish. I have been working with them for several years. They conduct trainings for children for waste sorting. So it's you're absolutely right. We need to start this training since childhood. As for veterans, on the contrary, veterans were involved in projects because we have a building company working with the veterans, and we are planning long-term cooperation, and veterans understand why they are doing this, because they defended our country and they want to make things better on this territory. So they are very active. So we are cooperating with the public hospital. We conducted workshops and trainings there. So Helena Architecture is one of our area. Hop, Nadia. As for the community, I agree with the sentence that we need to understand the motivation, but we understood that we need to build some communication and to inform people. We paid our intention to the situation. When we just organized workshop, it didn't work. There were a lot of mistakes. Then we met local inhabitants. We presented ourselves. We told about our cooperation, and they say, "Oh, you know us." We were creating online map with them, so they were very astonished that somebody came to work with them, and after that they were ready. Right now, when we come to different villages, other villages, local inhabitants recognize us. They come, they say hello, and they're ready to cooperate. So this is the way. If I had known these mistakes before, I would have done it differently. So if we work with the community, this is one situation, and at the national level, it's a global issue, and we can start from any area. For example, we communicate with the UNDP right now because we worked with the exchange of youth. I have a team working with the young people, and we wanted to show that it is impossible to work with eco-friendly materials. Right now, they are thinking on how to implement it, and this program may be implemented at the national level. And this initiative, which covers a lot of young people, and the young people maybe get involved through different institutions. Yes, of course, we would like to see it at the national level, but it's a quite complicated process. So the cooperation and with the existing program and the integration of such technologies and educational part are very important. If I can, please let me give some comments. We have a pilot project. So within the framework of this project, we wanted to prove that we can reach a zero net level. And we sort all these debris, and the community supported us. They asked questions for producers, for those who were engaged in this process, because nobody wanted to do it manually. But That's what we were doing for the whole month. We left this place because of the offensive, and right now we have a place where people bring disassembled materials, and I see no problems in reusing bricks. When donors came for the first time, they said that we were doing this for many years. So I think that we need to work closely with business and to prepare tender proposition. And we heard it smart disassemble, and we needed to do it first.
No, thank you very much for your contribution, and again about the translation. So I think we will maybe close there. Apologies again that we weren't able to hear the contribution today from Andrii, but I would encourage everyone, as I mentioned, to visit his work as well. But I would like to say a very big thank you for everyone, from Sofi to Anna to Scott to Andrii for their work, and for Lidiia for stepping in on short notice to give further support to the discussion. So thank you all again for joining us, and we will come back for the final session in the program, session 5, moderated by Mykolaiv at 5 o'clock. Thank you.
Дякуємо, чекаємо вас о 5.